read the manual properly. But, you know, my first Conservative conference was 1975, Mrs. Thatcher's first conference. Absolutely wonderful experience, which I'll never, ever forget. And debate was common there. You know, you come together not just to be, you know, photographed next to the leader and all the rest of it. You actually come there to exchange ideas, and obviously not in this case.
So this is obviously this is a very sensitive topic, which I would argue requires debate. What specifically was your objection to what Suella Braverman was saying?
Well, it wasn't just on the gender ideology issue. There was a general feeding frenzy, as far as I could see, against vulnerable people, asylum seekers, for example, the majority of whom who come to this country are actually judged to be quite entitled to be here, fleeing persecution. Then she went on to trash the human rights that we've been building up in this country for, well, since Magna Carta, really, you know, Bill of Rights, habeas corpus, but all of that was dismissed as luxury beliefs. And then she moved on to the subject of gender ideology. Now, nobody's ever explained to me what gender ideology is, but what I do know, it's a term that's used by people who don't much like trans people in order to vilify them. And you know, the reason they use these terms, I've done some research in Eastern Europe, for example, about the term LGBT ideology, where you get, for example, in Poland, you get villages and towns setting them up as LGBT-free zones, and their excuse is that they want to oppose LGBT ideology. And when I quizzed them what that was, nobody seemed to know. It's just they didn't like gay people, and they wanted to come up with an excuse.
But do you seriously believe that Suella Braverman doesn't like gay people?
I beg your pardon? Sorry.
You're not seriously suggesting that Suella Braverman just simply doesn't like gay people or doesn't like trans people? Or is that what you're claiming?
I believe the words that were probably written for her, well, I hope they were written for her, not that she doesn't believe them, were written by somebody who'd done a quick browse of psephological prejudices. And thought, well, we'll get a clap for that, won't we? Because these people are slightly different from us, and therefore they must be the problem. And that's not my Conservative Party. It never has been since I've been, a member at a very young age.
But can I ask you, Andrew, so when it comes to what Suella Braverman refers to as gender ideology or gender identity ideology, she's talking about very specific concerns that individuals have about the erosions of women's rights and their spaces.
Yeah, which specific concerns? Because that term gender ideology, I know of no ideology. I mean, the only thing I know about LGBT ideology is that, generally speaking, it's against people wearing cargo shorts. And as far as that, you know, there is which incidentally, I'm fully signed up to that, may I say. But I just don't see that it even exists.
Andrew, okay, so if I put to you what I think Suella Braverman means by gender ideology, perhaps you can address that. I think she's talking about the belief system that suggests that there are dozens of genders, that we each have an innate gendered essence or a kind of subconscious self, which can be at odds with our bodies, and specifically that society needs to be reorganised so that gender self-identification supersedes biological sex, even when it comes to single-sex spaces. And then in addition to that anyone who doesn't believe that should be censored, publicly shamed, fired from their jobs, and even criminalised. Is that not what she means?
No. She might mean it, but who believes that rubbish?
Lots of activists do, Andrew. And I can send you all sorts of documents and training manuals from people who believe specifically that. And this is why women are worried about their single-sex spaces. Do you accept, for instance, give you a specific example. Jenny Watson, I had on my show, a lesbian who set up a lesbian speed dating night. I had her on the show because activists were insisting that biological males should be able to attend that lesbian dating event, and she was inundated with threats. Someone sent her a noose, or an image of a noose. That's surely a problem, isn't it, when lesbians can't assemble without men forcing their way in?
Well, it certainly is. Nobody should intimidate anybody, and that intimidation should probably be followed up. We should probably embark upon prosecution from people who are doing that intimidation. But one of the things that I don't know that specific case, but of course the 2010 Equalities Act fully allows you to set up a space that's based upon assigned gender, assigned sex of birth. Fully entitles you to do that as long as it's proportionate. It always has been. It's never a problem. Why is it a problem now? Well, I think it's a problem now because I think actually we're trying to mask some other more inherent problems. I don't know why. You know, we've had transgender people in this country forever. One of our greatest travel writers, Jan Morris, she transitioned in the 60s. She was never a problem.
No, I agree with you.
April Ashley. Why was there not a huge fuss at the time of April Ashley? Trans women and trans men have been using facilities appropriate to their gender for years. Why is it all of a sudden become a problem?
I understand your point, Andrew. I suppose what feminists are concerned about is that we have had a cultural shift, where more and more individuals are identifying as the other sex and exploiting that system in order, for instance, to end up in a women's prison, as we saw with the double rapist Isla Bryson. So that is a legitimate concern, isn't it? And that's something that we should be having a discussion about, right?
Nobody thought they knew any gay people till Are You Being Served was on the telly. And then all of a sudden, they suddenly realise, oh, well, we do know gay people.
I suppose what I'm saying, Andrew, is I don't think that the feminists have a problem with trans people. I've never met a feminist who has an issue with trans people going about their lives and existing and having equal rights. Their worry is the notion of self-identification being applied in public policy and law that affects women's sports, women's prisons, women's single-sex accommodation on hospital wards and domestic violence refuge centres. You can surely see that's not transphobia. That's an attempt to preserve existing rights, yes?
Oh, yeah, but self-ID has been effective in most cases, apart from anything that apart from legally, has been effective in most cases since the 2010 Act. Discrimination against people because of gender identity has been wrong there, and gender identity is established by the person themselves. The only area where we don't have self-ID is where you want to get a gender recognition certificate. Now, almost nobody looks at gender recognition, uses a gender recognition certificate. It's very bureaucratic. But only then, for a gender recognition certificate, does it become, it effectively changes your birth certificate. And that's effectively all a gender recognition certificate does. Nothing else. Everything else about a trans person's lives, they have rights to self-ID because they know what gender they are.
Just finally on that, though, Andrew.
We shouldn't have the state telling us who we are. Do I have to pass a test in order to be considered a gay man? I do hope not, and it would be quite interesting to see what that test might be.
No, I don't think you have to pass a test whatsoever. But do you accept, though, the possibility that people can exploit a system of gender self-identification, as has been the case in prisons? I mean, there's overwhelming evidence that has happened. That is something is that something that concerns you?
There isn't overwhelming evidence of that happening when you bear in mind the number of people that are in prisons, the number of people who are transgender in prisons, and what they do is they come up with about 1 or 2 cases. Now, in prisons, they tend to be a lot of bad people, and so it is the duty of those prison authorities to keep people safe, and that's a failure of those prison authorities keeping people safe.
I think, Andrew, with respect, it is a lot more than just a 1 or 2 cases. I think there's overwhelming evidence. I mean, at the moment, just to give you some stats on this.
Appreciate you. We won't do it now, but you just send me a list afterwards, because I'd be fascinated to see the evidence that you have. Because let's take, for example, this moral panic about trans women using women's toilets, which they've been doing forever.
Okay, but let me just, okay, well, specifically on prisons, Andrew.
No, let's look at that, because that's a common trope.
Well,
Do you know how many cases there are of women being attacked by transgender women in toilets? Do you know how many there are?
I do know that the research has shown that attacks in unisex toilets are much more common than in single-sex toilets.
No, that's not the question I asked. You can answer another question. The question I asked was, in women's toilets, how many people have been attacked by trans women?
I don't think that's the point. I don't think that's the point. The point is about the principle of single-sex spaces. And you made the case that prisons, that there aren't cases of prisoners self-identifying in order to be transferred. So I would ask you to explain, Andrew, why it is. Let's give the stats. 1 in every 250,000 women in this country are convicted sex offenders. 1 in every 2,500 men are convicted sex offenders. And 1 in every 585 trans women, males who identify as female, are sex offenders. So is it the case that they are exploiting a system of self-identification, or the only other alternative is it your contention that trans people are just 5 times more likely to be sexual predators? Because it's got to be one or the other.
What we do, no, they aren't. And what we do know, however, is that trans people are much more likely to be victims of crime. In fact, last year,
we don't know that.
The Home Office
those statistics are not confirmed at all. Andrew, we could go on for ages, and I suspect we're going to return to this, but unfortunately we're out of time. But please do come back on the show. I would love to continue this conversation with you. I think it's really important.
You want to stop me, and you call this a free speech nation.
Yeah, but we also have timings and ad breaks and things like that, Andrew. I'm afraid we do have a schedule to adhere to. Okay. All right, well, next on Free Speech Nation, PM Rishi Sunak seems hell-bent on wiping out smoking.